Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. I was just waiting for my drink here at the fabulous Salton Bay Yacht Club. So you have no idea what I'm talking about. Well, then you're in the right place. Even though it may not seem true either, I'm also in the right place. This barren dirt where I'm sitting is where the $500,000 Salton Bay Yacht Club used to be. But I know what you're thinking. How could you have a yacht club in the obvious desert behind me? Well, out here in the Imperial Valley, in Southern California, if you told the locals who came for the waters, you wouldn't be laughed at, because out here is the largest lake in California, the Salton Sea. That lake once had more visitors than Yosemite National Park in its heyday. But just like the yacht club, the visitors have disappeared too. But why is that? How did the resort communities that were marketed as the new Riviera fall apart? Well, to summarize what happened, many different people failed to take into account the ever-changing nature of the lake. People see a view like this and assume that it will always stay the same. The man-made and natural environment of the lake and surroundings have never stayed the same. The height or elevation of the lake, in particular, has risen, fallen, risen again, and are now falling. This video will discuss the history of the Salton Sea from the beginning, during its heyday, now, and in the near future. The Imperial Valley hosted lakes in it even before the Salton Sea was created, thanks to changing directions of the Colorado River. The Colorado River has historically switched back and forth from a northern direction into the Imperial Valley and a southern direction into the Gulf of California. Silts of the river would block one direction and send the water the other way. When the course was set in a northern direction into the Imperial Valley, it would fill the basin and create a lake called Lake Cahuilla. The lake rose up 4 times in the last 2,000 years to 12 meters in height before it overflowed into the Gulf of California. Lake Cahuilla, though, dried up in 1580. Fast forward to 1892, the new Liverpool Salt Company would mine salt from a salt marsh centered west of a railroad station named Salton in the Imperial Valley. The lake bed at the time probably looked a lot like this salt mine in San Diego behind me. However, the Salton train station, the train tracks, and the salt mine itself would be at the bottom of the lake after 1905. How did this happen? Well, extremely high amounts of flow in the Colorado River, in combination with the river's high amount of silt, blocked the river's southern route and caused the entire river to change course. This new course was through man-made cuts on the Colorado River. These cuts were designed to transfer some of the water to the Imperial Valley for agricultural use, but not the entire river itself. This water flowed down via 2 pathways, up the New River and the Alamo River. In fact, in June of 1906, floodwaters rose as much as 7 inches a day, covering upwards of 400 square miles. To understand how much water this is, let's compare the flow of the New River in 1906 to that in 2017. On August 9, 1906, 300 million cubic feet of water rushed into the Imperial Valley every hour. Assuming half of this water went up the New River, that would be about 42,000 cubic feet per second. In contrast to this, the United States Geological Survey's website says that on October 9, 2017, when this view of the outlet of the New River was taken, 516 cubic feet per second on average flowed down the New River. My point being, imagine a little under 81.4 times the amount of water flowing up the New River in this image. The flow in 1906 was a huge amount of water. At the end of 1907, a new lake was born. This is the first case in which people overlook the history of the region as an ever-changing environment. Although the region had a history of the Colorado River changing course and flooding the Imperial Valley, people who were here were completely caught off guard. The floodwaters destroyed thousands of acres of crops, damaged large parts of Calexico, Mexicali, and submerged homes. Even if better cuts were made to the Colorado River, the Salton Sea would likely still be here today. The Salton Sea is only an accident in that people who think they can control nature could not stop the Colorado River from changing course. Anyway, this new lake was huge. According to the Imperial Irrigation District, or IID for short, the Salton Sea was at an elevation of 197 feet below sea level in 1907. And yes, I mean below sea level, not above. The Salton Trough, where the Salton Sea is located, is the second lowest place in the United States, with Death Valley being the lowest. Anyway, to help you visualize how big the lake was then, I've used special computer software called Geographic Information Systems to create a model of the lake's elevations throughout its life and into the future. According to my model, The Salton Sea was right here in 1907 at an elevation of 197 feet below sea level. See the Salton Sea way out there? That is the Salton Sea today. The Salton Sea must have been enormous when you keep in mind that the Salton Sea today is about 324 square miles. But the 1907 elevation didn't last long after the Southern Pacific Railroad completely sealed the breach using 2 million cubic feet of rock to switch the Colorado River's course back towards the Gulf of California on February 10, 1907. But that wasn't the end of the sea yet, obviously. Instead, Colorado River water would still reach the lake, just in another way. Since 1907, agricultural runoff has become the lake's main source of water in this dry desert that gets less than 3 inches of rainfall per year. In 1905, there was only 67,000 acres of agriculture to supply runoff to the Salton Sea. Since then, the number of acres in the Imperial Valley has increased to 450,000 acres in 2015. This increase over time, the number of acres under cultivation, resulted in more runoff and a slow rise in the elevation of the Salton Sea. The lake began to rise again starting in the 1920s. In 1920, the elevation of the lake was 250 feet below sea level. I would put a marker down where this is, but I don't really have a boat. So I can't say that the lake edge in 1920 was about 1,700 feet away from where I am standing now. The lake rose to an elevation of 248 feet in 1935, and is a little under 1,400 feet away. The edge of the lake was then around here in 1968 at 233 feet below sea level. During the 1950s and the 1960s were the heyday of the Salton Sea. Developments began to spring up around the lake. These include Desert Shores, Salton Sea Beach, Salton City, Bombay Beach, and North Shore. During this time, the North Shore and Salton yacht clubs were built, and bustling with many celebrities, including Bing Crosby, Sonny Bono, the Beach Boys, Jerry Lewis, and the Marx Brothers. During the mid-1960s, over 500,000 people visited the lake per year. All this, however, would not last. A sudden change in the lake's elevation in 1976 and 1977 because of tropical storms Kathleen and Doreen, with above average rainfall for the next 7 years, devastated the communities along the sea. Bombay Beach had to build a wall to protect the homes that weren't flooded out. Salton City had its Salton Bay Yacht Club washed out and abandoned for decades until it was demolished. The Southern Shore had a berm built to prevent the sea from flooding agricultural fields. This is the second case where people failed to take into consideration the changing nature of the lake. If the yacht club and homes were built further back or raised to help prevent flooding, then perhaps the developments would have been finished and the yacht clubs would still be here. Forward, the lake would later pretty much stabilize from 1979 to 2003. Let's go see where that is. As I said earlier, the lake would pretty much stabilize here from 1979 to 2003 at an elevation of 228 feet below sea level. 2003, though, would be the beginning of the end of the lake. October 10, 2003 is a day that will live in infamy of the Salton Sea. On this day, a copy of the largest water transfer agreement in the history of the nation, called the Quantification Settlement Agreement, went into effect. Fish in the Salton Seas always had their days numbered, but with the QSA they're dying out sooner. Salt concentrations have always been an issue. The first fish in the lake were from the Colorado River when it went straight into the lake, but they started dying out in 1929 because of increasing salinity. After 1929, the fish that can withstand the higher salinity would start to be brought in from places like the Gulf of California. In the 1960s, red-bellied tilapia were introduced to control mosquitoes and lived in tributaries as well as the Salton Sea itself. In the early 1970s, the Salton Sea became saltier than the ocean, allowing a hybrid species of tilapia to become the dominant fish by number and weight. These fish would become significant because they are the last remaining fish in the lake, and the salinity is over twice of that of the ocean. However, tilapia are no longer able to reproduce due to high salinity and are expected to die out soon, like the other fish that once thrived in this lake. Unlike the two other cases where people failed to take into account sudden events that changed the lake, people in this case thought that the lake would stay the same with eventual human intervention. In 1971, the Department of the Interior and other federal and state agencies conducted a feasibility investigation to provide alternatives for lowering the salinity and maintaining the elevation of the Salton Sea. Other studies have been made since then. But what they all have in common is that none of the project ideas to stabilize or lower salinity have been implemented. If a project were implemented, it may have worked well enough to prevent the almost complete destruction of the tourist industry and the collapse of the Salton Sea ecosystem. You might be wondering, though, why are some non-native and not endangered fish important besides supporting a fishing industry? Well, it's not just people that ate the fish, but birds. Birds that fly a north-south migration route known as Pacific Flyway used to go to places like this. Where am I now? I'm not in the desert anymore. I'm standing on the edge of an aquatic park called Mission Bay. Mission Bay used to be made of wetlands like this one behind me. But who wants a stinking wetland? We can have all this.
55,000 automobile parking spaces, 8,000 permanent resident boats, and an equal number brought on trailers for weekends and holidays, hundreds of housekeeping motel accommodations, thousands of landscaping plantings, and more. While hundreds of acres are being designed for recreation to meet the needs of our local citizenry and our visitors, income-producing leases will make the park economically self-sufficient and provide even more fun-filled facilities. If we could turn the pages of the master plan ahead, you would see come alive all the vision planned for the future. There will be Fortuna Cove Boat Harbor, the Anza Beach Park, a marine stadium, a speedboat course, resort hotel, tournament golf course, overnight motel, aquarium, aqua theater, picnic park, Bay Boulevard, Wayfarer Chapel, tropical gardens, sport facilities, open-air pavilion, fishing pier, youth areas, boating facilities and parkways, and countless other exciting recreation areas. In the Bay Haven, every type of pleasure craft will be provided for. Marine facilities such as these will expand so every boat owner may count on ample service and supplies, such as repair service, motors, sales rooms, slips, boat houses, and onshore lockers. Far out on this harbor entrance will be built a fishing pier. Over 4,000 feet of water frontage will provide free deep-sea fishing access. The bulkhead will be surfaced, railings will be built, bait available, parking accessible, so that catches like these proud youngsters display will be common occurrences.
This is Mission Bay today. All but 5% of the 4,200 acres of wetlands still exist. That may sound like a lot, but this is just a small fraction of the wetlands lost along the entire California coast. So where's a bird on the Pacific Flyway to go instead of the coast? How about a big lake, like this one? But we have developed both their original coastal wetland habitats are now starting to let their replacement degrade into almost utter uselessness. Forget the birds, let's talk people, specifically the locals who are first in line experiencing all the great problems that an unstable lake has to offer. Besides having to smell the wonderful rotten egg smell that this nutrient-rich water provides to them, breathing the air in this area for long periods of time has certain side effects. These include, but not limited to, coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, asthma, diseases including obstructive pulmonary disease, obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. People who are most at risk of these symptoms are the elderly and children. In fact, Imperial County has the highest rate of asthma-related emergency room visits in the entire state. But what's really disgusting is the question of whether the Salton Sea would have been allowed to degrade to the state it is now, and continue to degrade into the future if the people were, more white and wealthy? No, seriously. Salt City, the largest of the communities around the sea, in 2017 had an estimated population of just a little under 4,000, which is a little over 67% of those people identifying as Latino. In March 2009, 4.6% of California's population was unemployed, while 17.8% of the population in Salton City was unemployed. If you live in San Bernardino, Los Angeles, or Riverside counties in California, you are not likely going to be exposed to the dust from the Salton Sea's exposed lake bed. However, with increased wind speeds caused by climate change and a lack of progress in mitigating dust from the playa, who could be really sure of who is and isn't going to be affected by the toxic dust? After all, the smell of decaying organic matter in the lake has already been smelled as far away as Los Angeles before. So don't think if you're 200 miles away from the Salton Sea in Phoenix, Arizona, you're safe from the dust. Let's see the direct effects of the QSA on the lake's elevation after 2003 with my markers. Here's the shoreline of the lake in 2006 at 229 feet below sea level. Here's the elevation 2009 feet below sea level. 2012 at 232 feet below sea level. 2015 at 234 feet below sea level. 2018 at 236 feet below sea level, because that's not enough. And then way up there is 2020 at 238 feet below sea level. Clearly, the elevation of the lake since 2003 has been downhill, both metaphorically and literally, but isn't done falling yet. In 2030, the lake will be at an elevation of 251 feet below sea level and about 2,000 feet from the current shoreline. In 2045, the lake is expected to finally stabilize in elevation at 259 feet below sea level. The shoreline will be just 6,000 feet from where it is now. Keep in mind, as bad as that sounds, it's actually worse, because the shoreline I'm standing at is actually one of the sides to experience the least amount of shoreline recession compared to the north and south shores. Also, a few feet of shoreline recession may not sound like a big deal to you, but remember, this is a huge area to expose lake bed. Although projects to help resolve the ecological and dust problems at the Salton Sea are labeled as restoration projects, in reality they are just mitigation projects to help combat the habitat loss and the dust problems at the Salton Sea. Now you would think that the California government, who promised they would do all the necessary mitigation, would have implemented a plan immediately to keep both the environment and people safe from this environmental disaster. But just like the federal government in dealing with climate change, they haven't done much. So far, the state has completed 697 acres of dust suppression. This may seem like a lot, but IID has done over 3 times as much dust mitigation. Even with the combined efforts of these two groups, there is still about 15,950 acres of exposed playa today. This number, of course, is still increasing with falling lake levels. The Red Hill Bay project, which was supposed to be the model project of how to do dust mitigation around the lake, is still not completed and years behind schedule. What's the holdup for dust mitigation projects? Well, first, dust mitigation is extremely expensive. Complete Salton Sea restoration is estimated to cost between $1.5 to $2.5 billion, according to Bruce Wilcox at the California Natural Resource Agency, while the Bureau of Reclamation estimates restoration costing between $3.5 and $14 billion. Second, there are many different layers of government trying to study and restore the lake. These include the local Imperial Irrigation District to the federal government. Bureaucracy is really slowing down the amount of progress. Third, there are tons of permits that are needed to do any kind of restoration through these different government agencies. And 4, every piece of heavy equipment must be brought in, and it is very difficult not to get earth-moving machines stuck in the playa. That can be really sticky in some places. But let's get back to the QSA water transfer. Want to see for yourself the water that used to be sent to the Imperial Valley, of which some would flow into the Salton Sea as wastewater? Well, if you live in San Diego, you can find this water without leaving the comfort of your home. To find this water, first put a cup of tap water in a jar like I did here. Food coloring is optional, but really makes the tap water stand out. Then, using a measuring cup, take a little over a third of this water in the first jar and put it into another jar like this. And voila! You got the water. About 35% of the tap water in San Diego, now in 2020, is from the water transfer deal between IID and San Diego County Water Authority. Now let's see what a majority of this water is being used for. See the grass in the San Diego City Park? So green, soft, and lush. Well, this grass would easily turn brown and die without sprinklers in San Diego's dry climate. Grass may be great for parks, but grass is one of the worst ways to landscape residential lawns. In 2018, San Diego County residential homes used 65% of the county's water. 50% of this residential water was then used for irrigating landscapes. Although San Diego does not have enough local water to meet the county's demand, it is immoral that San Diego and the other cities in Southern California are using the majority of the water that used to go into the Salton Sea for purely aesthetic reasons. Grass lawns are not worth the demise of the Salton Sea that is destroying habitat for birds and damaging the health of the people in the Imperial Valley. I believe there are 3 different possible futures for the Salton Sea based on the current state of other lakes in the United States and abroad. These are Muddy Lake, Owens Lake, and the Aral Sea. Mono Lake is a salt lake in the eastern Sierra of California that was shrinking due to its source waters being sent away. In 1941, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power started diverting water from Mono Lake's tributary streams to LA that was 350 miles away due to its increasing population. As a result, over the next 40 years, Mono Lake's elevation fell by 45 feet, lost half its volume, and doubled in salinity. Also, a land bridge formed to the islands on the lake that had previously been a safe nesting area for thousands of California gulls. This allowed predators, such as coyotes, to kill eggs and baby birds. Just like what is happening at the Salton Sea now, air quality degraded due to toxic dust from the dry lake bed. However, in 1976, a group of students from UC Davis and Stanford conducted the first comprehensive ecological study of Mono Lake and found that if the water's diversion continued, ecological collapse was inevitable. In 1978, the Mono Lake Committee was formed to try to save the lake. In 1979, the Mono Lake Committee and the National Audubon Society sued LA Department of Water and Power, arguing that the water diversions to Los Angeles did not comply with the public trust doctrine. This legal document, which came to California law from ancient Rome, holds that the government has the duty to protect navigable bodies of water for the use and benefit of all people. This doctrine has resulted in forcing LA Department of Water and Power to divert less water away and allow the lake to eventually rise back to 25 feet before it was diverted in 1941. However, from the little bit that I understand of why the public trust doctrine can't be used at the Salton Sea has to do with two major differences between the lake. First, Mono Lake naturally produces geologically interesting tufa towers that would have been destroyed from falling lake levels. There are no tufa towers at the Salton Sea that I'm aware of. Second, the Salton Sea, unlike Mono Lake, is perceived as being a man-made accident that isn't naturally supposed to exist. However, there's always the potential that legislative action could change the fate of the lake using the public trust doctrine. The second possible future could look similar to Owens Lake, or should I say Owens Dry Lake, that is not that far from Mono Lake. Unlike Mono Lake, Owens Lake was successfully dried up by water transfers to the city of Los Angeles. Starting in 2000, the city of Los Angeles created 25 square miles of shallow ponds to control the dust supply it was emitting. Besides creating ponds, LA Department of Water and Power also controls dust using vegetation and gravel. One estimate found that between 900,000 and 8 million metric tons of dust per year was being emitted before dust control methods were implemented. LA Department of Water and Power reluctantly began using 95,000 acre-feet of water for dust control in 2013. Today they hope to use less water to control dust through their Owens Lake Master Plan. Getting back to the Salton Sea, this seems to be the future that local and state governments would like to see. However, do remember, even with the QSA's full effect in 2045, the Salton Sea, unlike Owens Lake, is not expected to completely dry up. Perhaps San Diego County Water Authority, or SDCWA for short, who's getting a majority of the QSA water, should be required to mitigate the dust at the Salton Sea, LA does with Owens Lake. But judging by an article by San Diego County Water Authority, they're not interested in taking responsibility. The article stresses how other sources than the QSA is decreasing the amount of water flowing into the Salton Sea and is resulting in more dust in the air. It is especially clear that they do not want to take responsibility when they wrote that San Diego County Water Authority has, quote, met all of its financial commitments since 2003 and is in compliance with all state and federal environmental obligations, of which they explained was mostly mitigation water that ended in 2017 to the Salton Sea. So unless litigation forces San Diego County Water Authority to give more funds to restoration, or be forced to take charge of the restoration, they will likely do nothing to help. I must mention that although I do not want to say that San Diego County Water Authority is misleading people in this article, the statistics they use clearly make the dust problems in the Imperial Valley occurring now and in the future sound like they are mostly unrelated to the increasing amount of dust from the Salton Sea's exposed lake bed. San Diego County Water Authority reports that only 4%, particular matter 10, that is dust that is 10 microns or less, in the Imperial Valley in 2047 would be from exposed shoreline without restoration. This statistic is interesting because every other source I have ever seen makes it sound like a lack of dust mitigation now and the future will be an extremely serious health problem. Then there is the last possible future, the one of which water is continually transferred without any significant dust or habitat mitigation efforts. The Aral Sea, which was once the fourth largest lake in the world, has almost completely dried up due to water diversion from the lake's two major rivers in the 1950s and 1960s. This diversion led to many of the problems that the Salton Sea faces now. Salinity rose and completely destroyed the lake's fishing industry in the 1980s that once employed 60,000 people. Toxic dust from exposed playa at the Aral Sea, like that happening now at the Salton Sea, is causing widespread human health problems, such as respiratory problems. Although the Salton Sea has a slew of problems that are getting worse every year, there are 3 good things about this place worth mentioning. First, take a listen. Hear that? Not many places in California where you have beachfront property is that quiet. If Salton Sea and the other communities around the lake were fully built, they would be filled with suburban noise that plagues much of the rest of the state. Second, because of the state of the lake, the land out here is dirt cheap. This has become a place for poorer residents. Although action is needed to keep these people healthy, the problems with gentrification could easily unfold if the problems of the lake are solved. People in power must use caution to avoid forcing the people who live here to move. Third, right now there is almost nothing to block the view of the surrounding landscape. Just look at those mountains. No buildings are built on their hill slopes and no smog is blocking them. The Salton Sea is pretty gross, but from another perspective, with the surrounding scenery is really quite beautiful. Restoration of the Salton Sea must be done, but it also must be done in a way that allows the good things of the lake to continue to flourish. Mistakes must be learned. The Salton Sea must be viewed as an ever-changing body of water, and action must be done soon to help mitigate these changes in a way that saves both humans and the environment. A recent development project called Travertine Point must never be allowed to be built. When Salton Sea was built, asphalt and pipes were wasted, and the desert was disturbed for development that never came. Building another community, even if sustainable, would surely create a demographic divide between the poor residents who live in Salton City and the surrounding communities and those who live in Travertine Point. The counties of Orange and Los Angeles by the coast have basically merged over the landscape. The communities out there should not follow suit to cover this desert. History indeed is doomed to repeat itself, but that is especially true if you don't learn from the past and prepare for the future. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and share.